Hi guys, and welcome to another episode of Whisky Geek. Ben here, stood outside of Deanston. I'm here for another set of excellent distillery experiences, and I'm happy to be bringing you guys along.
We've been in a distillery since 1966, although if you look at the building itself, obviously it's a lot older. The reason there's anything built in here in the first place is River Teith, the second fastest flowing river in Scotland behind the Spey. So not only is it really good water source for now making the whiskey, we also use it to generate all our power here as well. Originally for the mill, and now for the distillery. So what we'll do is we'll head out into the village, we'll talk a bit about the history, how we got from cotton mill into the mill. Founded, is very successful. The workforce originally came down from the Highlands after the Highland clearances. A manager at the time called James Smith, 17 years of age. He was the manager for the next 35 years. So he's the one that oversaw housing for the workers. So they're built in what's called divisions. There's 5 divisions in total. So what we have here is the cottages. So there's the management cottages. So James Smith lived in that house just there. You'll see when we go in the village the different divisions. So current employees in the distillery grew up in Deanston or neighbouring Doon. Parents, grandparents, things like that worked in the mill. So it's good to keep that sort of community aspect going. Obviously during that period, the early 19th century, Deanston's a very isolated sort of community. Own currency to pay workers, it was called Deanstons. We could only use it, however, in the 3 shops that were in the village, the post office, haberdashery and the grocers. Let's look at our bottles now, our new bottles. The top of the cork is a sort of replica of that original kind. So just talking about the lade, so it's man-made, 19th century, about half a mile upriver, the water gets diverted. Underneath us are now underground tunnels. Takes it right into the distillery, obviously making the power, but also for the whiskey. Stepping back in time, if you get rid of all the cars, so stepping back like 100 years. But yeah, you can see the different divisions. Back then it would have been one family in one room, there would be one up, one down. Quite cramped living conditions, but compared to a lot of people at the time, it wasn't too bad. The next figure that sort of appears is John Muir. Worked with James Finley & Co, worked his way up, actually then owned the company, oversaw a lot of developments. Village Green, the new school, you can see a bit further down, Clock Tower, with Brodie Hepburn. Alongside James Finley & Co had the bright idea of turning the mill into a whiskey distillery. You've got the water source, you've got the space, the warehouse and things like that. It was actually a very quick turnover. The mill shut in 1965. First distillation happened in October 1966, but it wasn't until about 1973 when we started to produce our first sort of single malt. So we're heading back now, back into the distillery. We do the distillery tour. So where we're starting off then, this is actually it's our cask yard. So it's where we're storing all our empty casks, empty barrels, before we use that lift to take them upstairs to be filled. So the reason we're storing casks outside is we're wanting to keep the casks, the wood, the oak nice and damp, nice and wet. We don't want the oils inside to shrink, to dry out, the casks to crack and shrink and leak whiskey. So these are really important in making our whiskey. All of our colour comes from the cask, the oak, the wood, and about 70, maybe even close to 80% of our total taste, our flavour, that's coming from the cask, the oak as well. So really, really important. So once they've used it once, can't use it again, we buy them nice and cheaply. We can then use these casks 3-4 times after that for making Scotch whiskey. The shape, the size, the type of oak, bourbon, sherry, port, people using rum casks, beer casks, all these little things impact the colours, the flavours. No 2 casks are the same essentially, okay? Now, obviously we're unpeated, so we get barley delivered 2 times a week generally. Just outside, it's stored in the big malt bins above your head here. It's actually 25 tonnes of barley in each one. If you look up by the door when you go out, you can see how tall they go. For one batch of whiskey though, Deanston we use 11.2 tonnes of barley per batch, okay? So single malt whiskey, it's a batch process, not a continuous cycle. When we're ready, pull down, drop the barley down. This red section here is a big corkscrew, it's pushing all the barley to the mill itself in the room next door. That's a very important piece of machinery in any distillery. It's still the original mill we've had since when we opened in 1966. And the barley's come into the room, head up that big pipe on the right. We get dropped about 40 kilograms at a time into the big hopper above the mill. And inside the mill we've got 4 sets of different steel grinders and dividers. Basically it's trying to crack open, grind all that barley down to what we then call grist. That's the outer shell, the outer casing of the barley. That wants to make up about 20% of the total. 70% of what we want is called the grits. That's your starch, your sugar, sort of the good stuff, the bulk of what we want. Like any sort of milling process, you can get a little bit of flour as well. It's important that that doesn't go above 10%. So the reason for that, the next stage, you're going to add lots of hot water to this to break down all the sugar. Too much flour, especially above 10%, I think 11 tons, you create big thick paste, clog up all the machines. So not what we want. So 20, 70, 10 is what we're trying to stick to. One of 6 in Scotland that's open topped, open faced, so you can actually see inside of it. And of those 6 is the biggest, it's about 13-ton mash tun. So all that's happening here is we're bringing forward our 11.2 tons of our grist, our milled down barley. That's going to get added inside our mash tun, and then to this we're going to add 94,000 litres of hot water. Basically what you want is just a big brown sugary water, we call it wort. So what you can see in front of you here, these are all called washbacks. So 8 in total. It's about 59,000 litres of our wort, our sugary water, the first 2 we mash together. That'll get added into one single washback. So one batch equals one washback, okay? So the yeast will get added, it's going to then start to ferment, fermentation. So the yeast eats away at all the sugars. It's that process that then starts to create our alcohol. Deanston, we aim for about 100 hours fermentation. The reason that we leave it for so long, different bacteria start to work, you create different sort of flavours. A bit forward now, into our still house, we distill it, take the alcohol right up. Huddle together a bit, you're okay taking pictures from here. Unfortunately we can't go down into the stills, but it's the heart of any distillery. This is our still house. So you can see we've got 4 sets of big giant copper stills. Although we have 4 of them, we actually only distill twice. Stills are just basically big giant copper kettles. They've got a big metal coil in the bottom. It's going to heat that liquid up. It's going to boil and evaporate. You see alcohol evaporates, boils before water. So it's the alcohol vapours. That's what's rising to the top of the stills first. You can see that they're quite tall stills. The pipe at the top is called the line arm. You can't notice that tilts upwards very slightly. So that means only the lightest vapours pass all the way through. That helps create a very light-bodied spirit, light-bodied whiskey. Filling station, our filling hall. So all the empty casks we saw outside get rolled along the cask yard, take up the elevator that we walk through. So they're all stored here, empty, waiting to be filled. So paint the end of them, number them, barcode them, things like that as well. So before we fill a cask, what we'll actually do is we'll wait. We'll wait when it's empty and again when it's full. Square bit of corrugate floor there, that's the scales, that's the weight. The reason we'll do that is each year the whiskey is going to sit to mature inside the cask. They're all watertight, wood, oak, it's porous, it's not airtight. We do lose a small amount every year just to evaporation. We call it the angel's share in the industry. Deep breath when you come in. Where we are now, this is warehouse number 2. So this is one of 7 warehouses we have here at Deanston. This is actually our smallest warehouse, however. About 3,000 casks in here. Altogether, we have about 30,000 here at the distillery. So, although it's our smallest, like I said, it's our most unique. So the most unique in the whole industry as well. When we were the old cotton mill originally, this was the original weaving sheds. So very early 19th century, Napoleonic times. Would have been about 500 women and children in here at its height, working over the looms, weaving that cotton. Not a nice place to work, but makes a good place for maturing whiskey now, but age is completely irrelevant. So I know taste preferences, even on core expression whiskies. The age you see in the bottle is just the youngest age it's in the bottle anyway. So what you make and produce every year, we export this around the world. You want it to taste the same every time you buy it. So our master blender's job, Kirsty, it's a female master blender that we have. She'll blend together lots of 12-year-old casks. You might have to add a bit of 15, a bit of 18 to replicate that flavour every single time. So fully matured the bourbon, minimum 12 years, most of it is 12 though. So this is American oak, golden colours, you can get your vanillas, caramels and fruity notes like I said as well. So all natural colouring, so don't add any caramel colour, any numbers. All of our whiskies are unchilled filtered as well.
Poached pear, and I get kind of like a coconut husk, because there's, you know, tannins has a bit of a stigma to it from the wine industry, but when you're talking about oak, those flavours, they come through quite nice.
A few people pick up something a bit like burnt toast, like buttery toast notes, but middle bottle, like I said, the virgin oak, so that's our non-age statement. Youngest using here probably about 6 years, but you could have, most of it could be like sort of 10, 12, sort of 18. So there's lots of different ages, bourbon, you still get your vanillas and caramels and honeys. The last 6 to 8 months though, it's finished off in brand new virgin oak.
I think my wife would really like this one. It's interesting. On the nose, it came across to me a little bit more punchy, richer, but on kind of the very sweet flavours than the 12-year-old, but on the palate, the 12-year-old's got more complaint.
So top of the core range is our 18-year-old. This is one from the previous batch actually. The new batch is same cask, blended, the taste the exact same. Just because they're all natural colour, it's come out the new batch actually is a lot lighter in colour. It's fully bourbon matured. First 16 years it's matured in bourbon hogsheads. So slightly bigger, adds a few extra stays at the cooperage, it scales it up from 200 litres into 250 litres, so you get slightly less contact with the wood, so the sort of longer, the slower it takes to mature, so it's slowly taking on those bourbon caramel notes. The last 2 years we've finished it off in first fill with bourbon hand select barrels, so...
I see what you mean, the continuation from the 12, it's fairly similar, but there's like way more elegance. This is refined too.
Yeah, it's smoother, more refined, longer sort of finish, but it just have a little bit of like a gingery sort of peppery finish to it.
Yeah, there's like spiced and woody tones. Again, you know, woody tannins people think are bad, but I'm really enjoying it on this.
Yeah.
First time? Is that your first time opening a cask?
Yeah.
There you go. So just till you hit the water, you feel it lighten, and then just slowly go down. You hear it fill up and then rise up there. Don't want to go in too quickly, otherwise you can start to charm. It's kind of a murky dram there. So grab your glass. There you go. That'll be enough. Magic. So it's not far off the 12, a little bit lighter in colour, a bit stronger as well. More so just floral.
The mouth coating element, the textural element is really much more fulfilling than 12 or 46%. It's got more of this alcohol astringency to it, but the flavours that are starting to come through, interestingly, they're the high notes, they're the florals, there's some elements of the barley, and there's a slight tinge of the wood coming through as well, which is quite nice.
So same again with the second one. Now, changes a wee bit here, so we're using an organic spirit. We can always get replaced. So the barley itself is for the organic source from up in Aberdeenshire. We're producing roughly about sort of 10,000 litres a year. This one here is very sweet, dry, a little bit of spice as well.
I always find this weird, it's almost like sourdough.
Sourdough.
Smell to the organic.
I see what you mean.
Kind of, it's like sour wheat. So the nose was very sweet. There was some fruity elements to it, but the palate brings loads more spice to it. There's quite a bit more heat.
Drink whiskey, save the planet. I think that's the message I'm getting across. But